One of the most underrated college football rivalries is taking place this Saturday. Now, this isn't a top 10 game. One team is ranked in the top 4 and undefeated, that being Michigan. The other team is below 500 and will probably miss a bowl game, if not just match that 500 win percentage at the end of the season in the Michigan State Spartans. And yet, this is a rivalry game. And history will tell you that the Spartans, who are 10-4 against Michigan over the past 14 years, have more than a chance to pull an upset, cover the spread, or quote-unquote expose Michigan here. Because Michigan just barely coming out of this game alive and winning by 7 points would not look good for Michigan, given how both of these teams have operated given their schedules. Michigan State is 1-4 against opponents with a pulse. Michigan is 3-0 against opponents with a pulse. Yes, Michigan State has had the tougher schedule. Michigan has really only faced Maryland, Iowa, and Penn State are the only opponents they faced with a pulse. And Penn State's good. I think Maryland's good too. Honestly, Iowa is average for an FBS team. They're a below average Power 5 team. Indiana, Hawaii, Colorado State, and UConn do not. They're more open practices to the level that Michigan plays at. It's the same thing with Michigan State, with Western Michigan and Akron. Both of these teams have been tested heading into this matchup, which isn't always the case. You look at 2017, early on in the year, and people didn't know that Michigan State was truly the better team than Michigan, and they were. 2011, 2013, the games took place later in the year than that 2017 matchup, but it was still the case. In 2016, middle of the year, sort of, Michigan came into town ranked second in the country, and a 3-9 Michigan State team played them close. That same 3-9 Mark D'Antonio squad also played the Ohio State Buckeyes very close. They went for 2 and didn't get it, and they ended up losing by 1 point. So this matchup, it's physical, it's super underrated nationally, it has a history of being close, it has a history of Michigan State especially being an underdog and overcoming that and coming out on top. This is a intense game. Michigan State won in the Big House in 2020. Granted, it was empty, but it's still an away win. They won in 2017 and in 2015. Jim Harbaugh is 1-3 versus the Spartans in the Big House. Mel Tucker is 2-0 versus Michigan. 1-0 in the Big House. Again, just have to mention it because COVID year was COVID year. He has not been in a Big House with full capacity yet. And he's also 1-0 at his own home against Michigan. Mel Tucker posting a 2-0 record. It's a small sample size. It's very impressive, though, given that he basically had nothing to work with in the 2020 season, and given the fact that Michigan in 2021 was the better team. And after Kenneth Walker left, after 2021, Michigan State has slid to a 3-4 start, and they're probably going to finish under 500 or right at 500 when the regular season ends. And Mel Tucker put together that 11-2 team. I'd like to call it the island of misfit toys. He took a ton of guys from the portal, some of them terrible, but some like Walker, very, very good. He took them from the portal, he took D'Antonio recruits, and he pieced them all together and was the architect, along with offensive coordinator Jay Johnson, the architect of that 11-2 top 10 finishing Michigan State Spartans squad. Jim Harbaugh, last year, won his first Big Ten title and got Michigan to the college football playoff. And this team, this Michigan team, in a video that I made, looks better. They look better than last year's team. So got head coaches who I think are 2 good head coaches. Michigan State in a down year, but they're rebuilding. Jim Harbaugh has solidified himself as a good head coach. You have 2 good head coaches here, 2 good cultures, 2 teams that they have good players. They truly do. I think Jaden Reed, Keon Coleman are great players for Michigan State. Peyton Thorne's a good player when he has a good supporting cast. Jacoby Windman's great for Michigan State. For Michigan, you have J.J. McCarthy, Blake Corum, Mozzie Smith, Donovan Edwards, Luke Schoonmaker. Just these two teams, I'm excited for this game to take place. It'll take place at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and it will air on ABC. Now, when I said both teams have good players, I'm not going to say that they're equal in that category. Michigan State slightly edges Michigan at wide receiver, and Michigan slightly edges Michigan State at linebacker. At every other position, Michigan is vastly superior than Michigan State. Quarterback, I'd absolutely argue it. Just look at statistics and QB rankings and the fact that Michigan has actually played the best. Out of the two schedules combined, Michigan has played the best defense in Iowa. Iowa's defense is fantastic. I know Ohio State hung 54 on them, but that was a large part because of Iowa's own offensive ineptitude. Statistics proved Iowa would have been better off punting the ball every play of the game than playing their offense, but that's a topic for a different video. Running back, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, CJ Stokes, they have a really good offensive line to help them, but just stand alone, they are better than Jalen Berger, Jarek Broussard, and Elijah Collins, though I think Elijah Collins is a very underrated player. He should be getting more carries, which, to the staff's credit, he did get more carries against the Wisconsin Badgers and did well against them. At wide receiver, you have Jaden Reed, Keon Coleman. Those two are the main guys there. For Michigan State. And they're better than Michigan's two main guys, who I would say are Ronnie Bell and Roman Wilson. Michigan, I think, might have slightly better depth, but Jaden Reed undoubtedly is the best wide receiver out of the whole bunch. He's come back from injury, and much like a lot of the Spartan team has, and Michigan State might be at its healthiest they've been since the beginning of the season against Michigan, which will make for an interesting matchup. Tight end, Malik Carr and Daniel Barker versus Luke Schoonmaker and what would be Eric All, but Eric All is out for the season. Schoonmaker has been extremely underrated, very underrated player. Daniel Barker and Malik Carr, they have been used. They're great. I just think that Michigan's tight end room, I think it's one of the more unmatched tight end rooms in the country, when at least Eric All is healthy. Eric All isn't healthy, though, but Luke Schoonmaker by himself still is a great tight end. On the offensive line, pardon my dog back there, you have center Alu Oluwatimi, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, because I think he and that offensive line are going to be the players of the game. D-line, you have Mozzie Smith. You have, you have Mozzie Smith, who's just an absolute freak at defensive tackle. You got Mike Morris at defensive end. Linebacker, Jacoby Windman for Michigan State is crazy. The problem there is he's really one of the few good players on that Michigan State defense, the other being Jacob Slade. Just Junior Colson, Nakai Hill-Green. Michigan overall has much better depth at that position, enough to say that they have overall the better linebacker room. Defensive back and special teams, I don't think need much of an explanation. Michigan State is the better punter, but Michigan State really doesn't have a kicker, whereas Michigan has a great punter and a great kicker. The secondary, we do not even need to spend a second on that. Michigan's given a 90.2% chance to win, according to ESPN's FPI, and they're currently favored by 22.5 points. Michigan is whopping favorites here. Michigan's also highly favored in efficiency metrics and power rankings. They're ranked number 4 in ESPN's FPI, and they're the 4th most efficient college football team. And they're the nation's 14th most talented team. Michigan State, on the other hand, is ranked 42nd in ESPN's FPI. They're the 35th most talented team, and the Spartans are the 73rd most efficient college football team. So Michigan State being, even with their talent standards, and there's always been a talent disparity between Michigan and Michigan State that Michigan State has overcome, both under Tucker and Antonio. Michigan State is not efficient at all this year. They returned a lot of guys on the front seven, and in that defensive tackle room, for example. They returned some offensive linemen, returned wide receivers, they returned a good quarterback in Peyton Thorne, and none of them have performed to the level they did last year. And when Michigan State, I think that, and I've said this I've said this over and over again, I feel like, and I don't know what's going on. I feel like when Michigan State's run game works, it's good. When it doesn't, though, Michigan State has the talent, they have the quarterback, they have the wide receivers, they have the performance and evidence of those wide receivers and quarterbacks to back up the fact that they should sometimes just air it out and see what happens. And Jay Johnson and Mel Tucker, I know that they like to run the football and be physical and give their defense rest. Here's the problem with that, though. Like, if you don't, Michigan State's defense, it isn't good. It's horrifically inefficient, whether you give them rest or whether you don't give them rest. I just think with the talent at wide receiver and quarterback, Michigan State should air it out, whether it's against Michigan or just against any competent opponent. And I really have not seen them do that whatsoever when watching Michigan State football. There is a talent disparity, an efficiency disparity, and just there's an overall disparity between the two teams that heavily favors Michigan. What favors Michigan State here really is the head coach record. Mel Tucker, again, is 2-0 against Jim Harbaugh. You cannot overlook that. And the history of this rivalry. Michigan State gets up and plays harder against Michigan than Michigan that gets up and plays against Michigan State. And that honestly, I would say that's close to a fact over the past 14 years. And it honestly stems from the, little brother comment and comments that continue amongst Michigan fans, which I will say as a Michigan fan, I don't like. You can mock them. Maybe it's even appropriate to say it if you blow them out. But I don't know. It just bothers me. It's like, why would you continue to push locker room motivation and all these other things? Why would you keep on pushing it when it has been a thorn in your side for years? That, as a Michigan fan, I will never understand. I do not participate in calling Michigan State anything other than Michigan State. I don't call them little brother or anything, because that is ridiculous, especially if you're a player of Michigan, to call them that, given what happened after Mike Hart, who is on Michigan's staff and who I think understands this, giving your opponent a rival bulletin board material. It's never a good thing. Regardless, Michigan is the superior team, just looking at it, 7-0 versus 3-4. Michigan looks to be a playoff contender and an elite team. Michigan State is, their goal right now is basically going bowling at the end of the year. So who are the players to watch? For Michigan, I think it's more of a unit, but I want to center, funny, on the center of that offensive line, Oluwatimi, one of the best offensive linemen in the nation, especially at run block. Him, Zach Zinter, and Trevor Keegan, in my opinion, lead the best interior offensive line in the country. It's why Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards ran on the outside versus Penn State, but it's why Blake Corum and Michigan, in general, they test the perimeter too, which I like because they didn't always do that with Jim Harbaugh. But they can test the perimeter and they can test the face of your defense and run straight through it, thanks to Oluwatimi. Why I think it's especially critical in this game that the interior offensive line plays well is I think Simeon Barrow and Jacob Slade are finally both healthy. I think Jacob Slade played against Wisconsin, so maybe this would be their second game. But that means that Jacob Slade is 3 weeks healthy as opposed to 1 week or a few days healthy against Wisconsin. And Slade, when playing at his best, is an All-American defensive tackle. Michigan is favored by 22.5 points. And if they want to cover the spread or beat Michigan State by at least double digits, I think that the interior offensive line is going to have to outplay Michigan State's defensive tackles. Now, whether that's likely or not, I think it's more likely than not likely, but it's still important to point out the fact that You need matchups. And Michigan State Michigan State let Michigan pass all over them last year, and it didn't matter because Michigan struggled to run against them. And at the end of the day, Michigan State's secondary last year, really unlike this year, actually was able to come up with a clutch interception. This year, if Michigan wants to win, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards talking about how they just want to win so badly, then those two and the offensive line with Oluwatimi and guards Zach Zinter and Trevor Keegan, they are going to have to play their best game and run the football viciously against this Michigan State squad. Now, if Michigan State wants to win, the key to that's much more tricky because Michigan State doesn't have good trench play on either side of the ball. Even with Jacob Slade and Simeon Barrow healthy, this Michigan State team can't pressure anyone. They can't pressure anyone. They've struggled to stop the run compared to last year. It's why their secondary is ranked better in pass yards allowed, is because teams can actually run against them and will run against them. And on the offensive line, Michigan State's offensive line is just as bad, if not slightly worse than last year, and they don't have nearly as good running backs who can make something out of nothing, like Kenneth Walker. All those things I mentioned to you, they aren't made irrelevant by what would happen if Michigan State ran an air raid. But I can tell you that it gives Michigan State a much more favorable matchup. Because regardless when you look at it, I don't think that Michigan State will be able to stop Michigan's offense. They'll be able to contain it at best, but they'll still need to put points on the board. And Michigan State is not going to put points on the board if they try and run the football against Michigan. It's not going to work. What will work, though, Jaden Reed, Keon Coleman, Daniel Barker, Malik Carr, keep your running backs off the field, put Peyton Thorne out there, 5 wide, 4 wide, 1 tight end, 3 wide, 2 tight end. Go out there and throw the ball. Throw it. Throw it. Honestly, Michigan's secondary is good. I think that Michigan State's best matchup to exploit, though, on their offense to Michigan's defense is their wide receivers or tight ends versus Michigan's linebackers in secondary. With how bad Michigan State's offensive line is and how good Michigan's D-line has looked, running the ball trying to use pass plays that will take a long time to develop, they're not going to work. And Jaden Reed's going to have to be wide open. He's going to have to play his best game, be as open as possible. Same with Keon Coleman, Daniel Barker, Malik Carr, all those guys. Jermaine Bernard, if he gets in the game. And Peyton Thorne is going to have to be on his A game too, because if Peyton Thorne plays like he did against Western Michigan, like he did against Ohio State, like he did against every game except the Washington game and Wisconsin game, well, that might be the end of it, regardless of the schematics that Michigan State uses. But I think that since it's Michigan State versus Michigan, I think Thorne is going to he's not going to have a terrible performance. Maybe he will, but I have a feeling that he's going to play a decent game, a good game. I think it's going to be more dependent on can Michigan State's wide receivers and tight ends get open before the pocket collapses and Thorne gets sacked by Mike Morris or slammed by Mozzie Smith. My prediction here, Michigan 45, Michigan State 14. And believe me, there is a part of me that thinks that this will not happen. But you look at efficiency, you look at football power, you even look at the spread and who's done a better job at covering it. Michigan State's 2-4-1 against the spread. Michigan's 4-3. Michigan's 7-0. Michigan State's 3-4. Michigan has one of the best strength of records in the country. They're already a lock for having a winning season. Michigan State is closer to a lock for missing a bowl game than not, which was unthinkable in the preseason. Michigan will have a similar game to what they had against Penn State, except I think that Michigan State is going to start off faster than Penn State. The problem is they don't even have the depth that Penn State has on offense or defense. They don't whatsoever. Michigan will have 500 plus total yards of offense again. Half of that, maybe more, will be on the ground. I anticipate Michigan and Michigan State, given the history of this rivalry, even in 2019, which was a blowout, it was a close game for a quarter and a half or 2 quarters. And I think that'll be the case. Michigan being a second half team, they have better depth. That crowd is going to have juice. I think that Michigan will eventually break Michigan State, the same way they did Penn State, the same way they did Maryland at the end of the game. The big plays, especially because of Michigan State's secondary, the big plays through the air are going to have an impact. The Wolverines will dominate the Spartans in the trenches on both the offensive line and the defensive line. This Michigan team looks like the best team in the Jim Harbaugh era, and I think that will earn him his first win against Mel Tucker, where he will be 1-2 against Mel Tucker, which I, again, referencing that I'm a Michigan fan, not a fan of, but you got to start somewhere, and 1-2 is better than 0-3, because if he goes 0-3, the reaction video for you all will be priceless, and I encourage you to tune in whether it's a Michigan win or a Michigan State win. But if it is a Michigan State win, the reaction will be absolutely priceless. It will be better, more comical, and filled with more rage than last year's reaction video, which you should check out too. The Spartans will start fast. Michigan State against Michigan seemingly always starts fast. Trick play, flea flicker, a quarterback running back pass to a quarterback like in, I think, 2018, or was it some kind of trick play off of a turnover. Michigan State always does this against Michigan, especially in the Mark D'Antonio era. But I don't think the Spartan team can last. Michigan State has never played a game more than half of a game of above average football. Never. Like even against Wisconsin in that win. At the end of the game, when Michigan State had a chance to win, they still messed the snap up during the field goal. This team they're incapable of executing a good game plan. Incapable. And I'm saying this as a guy who watches Michigan and Michigan State. Michigan can execute. Michigan can dominate. Michigan can outperform good competition. Michigan can wear you down, out-physical you. Michigan State can't do any of those things this year. The Spartans have to air this battle out if they want to have any chance to win. Any. And even then, Michigan's secondary with Steve Clinkscale as their coach and Rod Moore, Mike Sanderstill, they're not going to be a pushover unit either. So it's not just going to be that the Spartans have to air this battle out, but their defense is going to have to play to a level that they haven't played all year. All year. And same with their secondary, too. Their secondary is going to have their best game all year. You're facing a better quarterback than Michigan had last year. You're facing a better offense, both rushing and passing, than what Michigan had last year, if you're Mel Tucker and company. And this defense cannot hold their ground at all. They're incapable of making any kind of stops, except for goal line stops. And Michigan State hasn't faced an offensive line like Michigan, so if it's 4th and goal, and Michigan's at the 1, Michigan's going to line up, the crowd's going to be loud, and Michigan's going to punch it in, and the floor is going to fall out of the bottom. That's what's going to happen here. Now, I'm going to say as a Michigan fan, given the history of this rivalry, I can see a scenario where Michigan State wins. That's not impossible. In fact, that's very far from impossible. It's not likely. It's very unlikely. Never count Michigan State out, though. You just can't do it. And there is a part of me, for this game in particular, where I will admit, I am a little scared. I am. And that's where I'm going to end this video. If you liked it, please hit that like button. Comment your thoughts on this game down below, your score prediction, who will have the most yards, who will be the player of the game for each team. Comment those things down below. Subscribe to this channel, again, like the video, and hit that notification bell so you can get notified when I go live tonight, live in the future, and when I upload new content. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye.